To take the sins of mankind onto yourself is to understand that within you dwells exactly the same spirit that commit the atrocities at Columbine or that ran the camps at Auschwitz, and to actually understand that that's part and parcel of your makeup, and then to take responsibility for it. And I think that in the aftermath of the terrible 20th century, that's what we're left with. We're left with the necessity to take responsibility for the most terrible aspects of ourselves. And that way, perhaps we can stop those terrible things from happening again.
The world has seen many horrors. There have been so many absolutely terrifying and horrific crimes that make you doubt the purpose of existence itself. And it is quite saddening that these horrors are perpetrated by husbands, wives, sons, parents, cousins, friends, regular people like you and me. Almost no force is as destructive as man. We rave and rage against the malevolence of humanity without taking a step back to examine our responsibility in feeding such malevolence. The mind is a dark, dark place capable of such devilishly horrifying acts. But many people live in perpetual denial of this singular fact. They try very hard to shudder and suppress this darkness while feeding its growth through small acts until it becomes so big, it explodes and they explode with it. Jordan Peterson, a professor of psychology, clinical psychologist, and popular YouTube personality, examines how we can handle our darkest feelings of existence itself. Many serial killers, mass murderers, and perpetrators of other terrible acts against humanity often start by recognizing the malevolence in others without considering what is growing in themselves. And to squash the same malevolence, they decide to add to the terror. But Peterson explains that there is a better way to approach things to avoid future disasters and horrific acts, beginning by accepting that even the gentlest and seemingly harmless person has a dark side. Only then can we begin the natural process of acceptance and help make the world a better place. Listen to Peterson's simple analogy about how you can handle your darkest feelings about existence and humanity.
You know, I read about the Columbine massacre and the kids who undertook it. That'll make your hair stand on end if you want to read something that will really disturb you. Reading Eric Harris's writings will really disturb you. No matter how much you know about human beings, reading Eric Harris's writings will disturb you. And Harris is Cain, He says it straightforwardly. He hates human beings. He hates being itself. He would destroy everything if it was within his power to do that. And of course, him and his colleague were motivated to produce far more carnage than they managed that day. What was successful was only a fraction of what they had planned. And Harris said very straightforwardly that he had set himself up as the judge of being, and that it lacked all utility in his eyes. Human beings certainly should all be removed from the face of existence because of their pathology and the fundamental horrors of being itself. So there's nothing in the Cain and Abel story that isn't real. It's real, and Cain complains to God, as people will when their dreams are dashed. And that goes for people who don't believe in God too. It doesn't really matter, It's harder, I suppose, if you're atheistic to figure out who to blame. But that doesn't mean that the sentiment, it doesn't mean that the sentiment is any different, right? The same drama is being enacted. You shake your fist at the structure of being rather than at God himself, but it doesn't make any difference except in the details. So God responds to Cain and tells him that he's got no right to judge being before he gets his sacrificial house in order. And even worse, he says that Cain is the architect of his own downfall, and the invited catastrophe in into his own house willingly, and entered into a creative union with it, and therefore brought about his own demise. And it's that additional self-knowledge, and you can imagine too, imagine that you're facing your life, you're facing the failures of your life, and let's say that you've had a failed life, and you're bitter about that, and then you meditate upon it, and you think, well, why has this come about? And then you think, well, perhaps I did something wrong. When Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago, which is the book that detailed the catastrophes of the Soviet Union and helped bring it down. There's one part of that book that just struck me so viciously when I read it. He was in the Gulag, and he was there for a very long time, and he said that he observed a variety of people in the camps who he really admired. They were rare. They were usually religious believers in his experience, who were not participating in the pathology of the camps at all, period, no matter what. He said he learned a lot from watching those people. He had a hard time believing that they even existed, that they could even exist. But he said that one of the things that he was brought to as a consequence of watching those people live their contract with goodness out even under the most horrifying of conditions was that it was possible that he himself was responsible for his position in the camp. Now it's a very dangerous line of argumentation, because who wants to be the one who blames the victim for the catastrophe? You have to be very careful when you walk down that road. But Solzhenitsyn was speaking about himself, and he said, well, he was a communist, and he arrogantly and forthrightly moved the movement out into the world and had not fully gone over his life with a fine-tooth comb to find out what mistakes he had made that brought him so low. But his contention eventually was that part of the reason that he ended up where he ended up was because he and many others had completely forfeited their relationship with the truth and allowed their society to degenerate into deceit and tyrannical catastrophe without mounting sufficient opposition. And so he decided when he was in the camps to straighten himself out bit by bit, and that culminated in the production of the Gulag Archipelago, and that book really demolished once and for all any moral credibility that the communist totalitarian systems had left. And so one man in the depths of catastrophe who determined through good example, at least in part, to stop lying, produced a book eventually that demolished the foundation of the very system that had imprisoned him. And that is really worth thinking about. That's one example of the absolute grandeur of the human soul and the capacity for transformation that it has when let loose properly on the world. So let's say you're conceptualizing your own failure, and you meditated on it and you come to the conclusion that God forced Cain to, hey, not only have things not been going very well for you, but it's actually your fault. And not only that, you brought it on yourself. And not only that, you knew it all the time. Well, then you might think you'll wake up and fly right? You'll get your wings in order and fly right, but there's no reason to assume that at all, and that's not what happens to Cain. That just makes him more bitter, right? And you can understand that if you think about it just for a second. It's like bad enough when something horrible happens to you, but then to have to swallow the additional pill, right? To have to take in the information that you could have done something different. It was avoidable, and you knew it at the time, and you decided to do it anyways. And I think people are in that situation a lot more often than anyone is willing to admit. You have that little voice in the back of your head that says, don't do it. And you override it. And it's arrogance that makes you override it. It's always arrogance, It always warns you. It's always arrogance. Yeah, I can get away with it. It's like, no, you can't. I don't think you ever get away with anything. So, and maybe your experience has taught you different, but my suspicions are it hasn't. And if you think it has, well, the other shoe hasn't yet dropped. So Cain doesn't take the opportunity to let God's wisdom reorient his character. And that could have been the outcome. He could have got down on his knees, so to speak, and said, oh my God, I've been wrong all along. I've been living improperly. I've been making the wrong sacrifices. Abel deserves everything he has. I got exactly what was coming to me. Could I possibly now straighten myself out and live in repentance and improve my position? But that's not what he did at all. He said, all right, fair enough. I get it. It's like, I'm going to go after the thing I most admire, and I'm going to destroy it. And I'm going to do that despite its cost to me. And I'm going to do that just to spite the creator of being. Well, that's exactly what Harris did at Columbine. It's exactly what he says, in fact, in his uncanny writings. It's why the mass murderers always shoot themselves afterwards, not before. Because you might wonder, if you're so upset with the structure of being, why you don't just commit suicide in your basement? Why do you have to go out and mass murder before you top it off with a gun to your forehead? Well, you don't make the point as effectively if you just commit suicide in your basement. It's like, well, my life means nothing to me, but neither does anyone else's, and neither does the structure of being itself. And I'll take all my revenge as much as I possibly can, and then just to show you how little I care, I'll cap myself off at the end. And I would say also, people say all the time, I don't understand how that could happen. It's like, I don't believe that. I think an hour of thought, of real thought about your darkest feelings about existence itself illuminates the pathway to that sort of behavior quite clearly. And I think if you I mean, I might be wrong. Like, I might be a darker person than most. And, well, at least I think there are plenty of people out there who are sufficiently dark to know exactly what I mean when I'm saying these things. And I would also say that if it doesn't leap to your understanding how that pathway might be illuminated, then you need to know a lot more about yourself than you actually know now. Because whatever you might say about someone like Eric Harris, he was a human being too, you know. There's this idea in the New Testament that Christ was he who took the sins of the world unto himself. It's a very complicated idea, but part of it is associated with the idea that he met the devil in the desert as well. To take the sins of mankind onto yourself is to understand that within you dwells exactly the same spirit that commit the atrocities at Columbine or that ran the camps at Auschwitz, and to actually understand that that's part and parcel of your makeup, and then to take responsibility for it. And I think that in the aftermath of the terrible 20th century, that's what we're left with. We're left with the necessity to take responsibility for the most terrible aspects of ourselves. And that way, perhaps we can stop those terrible things from happening again. And that also means, you know, that you don't look for the what would you call it? The purveyor of malevolence outside yourself, right? It isn't someone else, even though sometimes it's someone else. You know what I mean? It's like there are identifiable perpetrators, but that's not precisely the point. The point is something more like that the proper place for the encapsulation of that malevolence, at least the proper place to start, is within the confines of your own existence, and then perhaps within the confines of your family. And that way you're not a danger to those that you misapprehend as malevolent and evil, because you won't get your aim right to begin with. You'll identify them improperly, and you'll take your revenge in a manner that allows you to omit your own responsibility, to act out your unconscious desire for revenge, and to move the world just that much closer to hell. Well, so Cain kills Abel, and then Cain gives rise to his descendants, one of whom is the person who's the first artificer in weapons of war. And then comes the flood, right? Which seems perfectly, miraculously reasonable to me, because what those stories do, it's so amazing that the story of Cain and Abel segues into the story of the flood, because it is the case that the catastrophes that beset society can best be conceptualized as the spread of individual pathology into the social world, and the what would you call the magnification of that pathology to the point where everything comes apart. And I truly believe that if you familiarize yourself with the last 100 years of history, that that's the conclusion that you would derive. And the people who are most wise that I've read who've commented on that say the same thing over and over, which is the key to the prevention of the horrors of Auschwitz and the Gulag in the future is the reconstruction of the individual soul at the level of each individual. And that's a terrible message because it puts the burden on you. But it's an amazing message because it also means that you could be the source of the process that stops that catastrophe and malevolence from ever emerging again. And you know, it's hard for me to imagine that you have anything that could possibly be better to do with the time that you have left.
As the famous Cherokee riddle goes, there are two wolves warring in each of us. If we feed the good wolf, it becomes stronger and overpowers the evil in us. However, if we fail to acknowledge the presence of that evil wolf in ourselves, our spouses, parents, children, friends, relatives, we will never be able to read the signs until it is too late and dozens or hundreds of people have to pay for our oversight. Thanks for watching. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking videos about life, humanity, and existence.